Send to the story now. The African National Congress top brass will this weekend travel to Zimbabwe and Zambia to prepare for the exhumation of struggle combatants' mortal remains. Families and members of the ANC are expected to perform traditional family rites in both countries in an effort to repatriate the remains of former Party Secretary General Advocate Duma Nokwe, amongst others. ANC's International Relations Subcommittee Deputy Chairperson Obed Bapela joins us now for more on that conversation. Good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. We heard in 2020, it would have been, some of the disgruntled stalwarts saying that in one of their visits, for example, to Zambia, they would have seen around 800 graves of buried freedom fighters. Has the ANC gotten around to doing an audit and working out the accuracy of the number of these mortal remains that still need to be repatriated?
Good evening, Thabo Mdluli, and to our viewers. We are processing the audit because it differs from one country to the other. Currently, we are standing at 1,000 exhumations and repatriation or expatriation that we need to do. However, it was going to take a period of time because it's so difficult to trace some of the burial sites, because some of the cemeteries in some of those countries are bushed with a lot of place numbers disappearing. So you'll need some kind of a mapping process that will have to be undertaken before you could be exhuming. Exhuming only if you find that indeed it's an accurate information that you have. Right. So it's going to take us a bit of a time, 5 to 10 years really to do. But the program is starting now. We're bringing about 40 remains back into South Africa on the 27th. And the exhumation has started. Families have been there. They've done their own rituals, which in African custom you ought to do.
How important is this and the significance thereof? Of course, to the family is quite significant, but also to the country, to many young people who might not understand the context of this liberation struggle.
Well, it's very important, and there will be narratives that we have already taken a concept document to the NWC. It was adopted this past weekend. It will guide on explaining who are these people, their leadership positions at the time of death, their role they've played in fighting for freedom in South Africa against apartheid, why they left the country, the detachments in exile that they joined, starting with the Luthuli detachment. Majority of the people that are coming are the Luthuli detachment, including leaders such as Advocate Duma Nokwe, who was the Secretary General of the ANC from 1958 to 1978, will narrate about the role that he had played at that time until he left in the early 1960s to exile. Mayor Florence Mposho is another who emerged as the first woman in the National Executive Committee in 1969 at the Morogoro Conference. People will hear about what is Morogoro Conference, what happened in that conference, but also she became the leader of the ANC Women's Section because the Women's League was banned alongside the ANC at the time. So they couldn't have a conference in exile. And that is why when she died in 1985, Mayor Gertrude Shope, who is now 99 years old, took over the reins and then brought that women's section to establish or re-establish the ANC Women's League. So the history on the women's struggle will be centered around her because she participated in the 1956 Women's March, which just comes from the August month, which is dedicated to women, and also on the anti-pass, when the DOM pass was extended to the women in the 1950s. The struggles that women in Dinogana, in Ziras, and also in the Free State took up, and leading up to that particular big march by women in 1956. We have other people such as Ted Matigiza, who was a drum journalist in the entertainment section, ending up realizing that apartheid is not a system that respected black people, left the country as a journalist, went to exile, and ended up taking arms and joining the detachment of the Lituli. Potlako Leballo, the president of the PAC, who also left the PAC, was part of those liberation movements that fought for struggle. So these narratives will be dominant in the in the media, in the social media, will then bring them back to the young people to know that the freedom in South Africa was not free. There were so much sacrifices. There were efforts that other people had to take arms to really take on the mighty army of the apartheid and super racist regime that existed at the time.
Now, you know the debates in South Africa, and you're well aware of them, you're well versed with them. Every time, for example, there's provocation around illegal immigration, undocumented foreign nationals and jobs, and there's a struggle for a scramble for jobs, shall I put it that way. It is always raised this question that South Africans need to be, taught about this liberation history and what these other countries on the continent would have played. How important would have been the relationship between South Africa and Zambia and those cordial bilateral relations with South Africa in facilitating this particular repatriation?
Well, obviously, as international relations of the ANC, we had to engage with the ruling party in Zambia, including the host party at the time, the unit of KK Kaunda, who had given even the headquarters of the ANC in Lusaka from the 1980s, migrating from London closer home. And we will then obviously be demonstrating how these countries contributed to our liberation. If it was not them sacrificing their own and spaces and ensuring that we advocate our democracy and we are able to be homed in those particular countries as refugees, and then those who join the liberation movements as fighters against the apartheid regime, definitely people will then understand the role that Africa played from the AU resolutions and then up to when we got our freedom. Yes, there will be a lot of education because the countries that are focused in Southern Africa, that includes Uganda, which is just outside, Tanzania, Mozambique, Botswana, Lesotho, Eswatini, and Zimbabwe and Zambia, and to some extent Namibia, will be expatriating the people there, but will go beyond the Southern Africa to Africa as a whole, and also to other global spaces where we have graves of our own heroes and heroines that we need to bring here. But the issue of migration, obviously, has its own tensions currently, and the South Africans are understood from the context in which they are raising the issue. The issue is a lot of them are undocumented. It's a correct position. We need to do something to rectify that so that anyone who comes to South Africa is known for the purpose in which they are here. And if they are coming for opportunities, we need to balance giving those opportunities to those people, but also balance and ensure that the skills and the South African who are unskilled, if the job is not a skilled job, we are able to give to South Africans, like all other countries are doing. Tanzania, they don't allow foreign nationals in their security sector, not in the police, not in the army, not in the town police for that matter, and not in the agricultural sector. Those are the preserve of the Tanzanians. So we need them to learn from them on how they've really dealt with these issues. In Ghana, you cannot just come and start a spaza shop because they say that is not a scarce skill in Ghana. So all those spaza shops that are only run by Ghanaians. We might then have to look at such, because the South Africans have really called for the leadership on these issues to regulate and then ensure, therefore, that those people who are here are regulated and also do not take jobs that could easily belong to South Africans.
Yeah. Internal ructions, I suppose, between the parties in the government of national unity. Do you see that question of how we handle this question of immigration being a cause of instability? You know, Patriotic Alliance has a Mabahambe stance. You know, Action SA, for example, which now is going to be in some kind of an arrangement with the ANC we know definitely in the city of Johannesburg and maybe in Tshwane as well, has also got put South Africa first type of stance when it comes to immigration. How does that play out in this government of national unity?
But I think those parties are now beginning to learn the ropes of governing. And I'm glad that even though they do have a stand as parties, but in the government of national unity, they have to conform to rules that governs Africa through the AU. You need to read a lot of resolutions and then the AU documents that are beginning to help us. We also have to read the UN resolution and some of the laws we have adopted in the past. And I'm glad the Citizenship Act is now under review, and soon it will be in Parliament, that could then begin to regulate and review the way we have been receiving other Africans for other reasons other than refugee status, so that we could then all of us debate, discuss, and agree. Definitely there will be an open debate, there will be open discussions, and I hope South Africans will bring their own views and ideas, but the Mbahambe model is not a winnable model. Africa is our continent. We are Africans first and foremost in South Africa, but we also have what we call the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that we ought then to also to begin to manufacture and sell goods to the very market, 1.3 billion South Africans who want to also have a share of whatever we produce. And South Africa is #1 manufacturer sector in the continent. Why don't we take that leverage and do so? But definitely we also have to then regulate movements of people, have common documents that can ease that movement, knowing who is a person that arrives in a country, and also the citizenship of the continent be regulated in a way that all the fears that South Africans have, including some perpetrating crime, can then come to an end, and they can be as harmonious as they have been, even in the 50s, in the 40s, when a lot of Africans came to work in the mines. Yeah. So there were no flashes of Afrophobia, of xenophobia, and we just hope, therefore, that this matter is a very sensitive matter. It's an outcry currently, and we cannot ignore it. That is why we are ready to learn from each other and come up with solutions that can really work for South Africa.
As we wrap up, while we're on that point, and you've already mentioned there is some legislation under works. We've got that white paper on citizenship and migration currently doing the rounds on the corridors of the National Assembly. As the International Relations Subcommittee, are you fully behind this white paper, and therefore are you anticipating massive changes, particularly when it comes, for example, to things like legislation impacting on migration in South Africa, right to work, right to education, the principle of non-refoulement, Refugees Act, and so on and so forth?
We definitely agree with some of the versions and the proposals in the white paper. And as I said, obviously, Parliament will then go on public hearings at some point to really solicit the views of the people, the citizens themselves, across all corners of South Africa. And I'm pleading with South Africans to participate, to come up with and express their views, and then begin to really found each other on common grounds that will emerge into the new law. In that way, that's how laws have been enacted, promulgated, and also developed in South Africa towards conclusion. And we just hope, therefore, this matter, emotional as it is, emotive as it is, will then help us to find each other from different parties and thinking as South Africans. But otherwise, South Africa, the remains of our our heroes and heroines are coming on the 27th of September. Let's really give that respect. They have been hosted in those countries for the past 40 years, 50 years, and 30 years. So they are coming home per agreements with those countries. We will seal those graves and leave memories on those graves that they were. That here was so-and-so has since migrated to South Africa or expatriated, and then obviously the history will not be ravished, but the history will then be there for all to see that we were once together in the struggle against apartheid for freedom in South Africa.
Mr. Bapela, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. International Relations Subcommittee Deputy Chairperson there, Obed Bapela, joining us this evening. Right.